Welcome to episode 147 of Navigating Now. My name is Aishani Gupta, and I'm a senior consultant here at Thoughtium, and I will be your host today. Today, we are kicking off our August Perspective series with a look at how self-discipline can be powerful to unlock individuals, teams, and organizations. The Perspective experience consists of three parts, that is great conversations, an article, and a toolkit. You can find the article that gets you closer to the conversation and is available on thoughttium.com/perspectives. And the Thoughtium Perspective Toolkit that shall follow soon after allows you to bring this topic to your teams. As a reminder, we go live every Thursday at 3 p.m. Central, and you can find all our episodes at thoughttium.com/live. Today, for our very first episode in our three-part series, we have joining us today Brad Israel. Brad is a leader with over a decade of service in the US Army and is a founder and president of Warrior 360, which is a leadership and development company focused on coaching and consulting with businesses and teams. In today's episode, we will be exploring the concept of self-discipline and discussing its role in Brad's life and career. So let's welcome Brad. Welcome, Brad. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Aishani. I look forward to the conversation.
Absolutely. Brad, we love doing this. One word to describe how you're coming in today.
That's a great question. I'm on the road from middle of nowhere, North Carolina is where I'm calling in from. So I'd say driven is probably driven. Yes, driven to get where I need to be and just to be able to continue to execute on what I need to do.
I love the double entendre there. It's a good word, driven. Well, welcome once again, Brad. And as we get started, for those tuning in, we'd love to hear a little about you and your background and your journey so far.
Sure. So I grew up on the Gulf Coast in Mobile, Alabama, and went to school up in Virginia, in Farmville, Virginia, a D3 school, Hampton-Sydney College, and really just had a remarkable upbringing and very, very privileged. A loving, nurturing household, wonderful parents, values-based household. 9/11 happened when I was a sophomore in college, and that really sent me on a inward trajectory to do some deep self-reflection and who I was, who I wanted to become, and had some incredible mentors while I was at school up there. One that happened to be a retired 3-star general who had a tremendous impact on my life and just deeply inspired me with the way that he lived his. And so that's kind of what sent me on the journey into service. And I originally planned to do 3 years and get to deploy and serve overseas, but just really fell in love with the opportunity to serve and the people that you get the privilege to lead in combat and also just in character development and leadership development. And so I ended up staying in quite a bit longer and served as a infantry officer in an airborne infantry unit, and then ultimately went into the special operations community. And just it was a remarkable experience, tons of lessons learned. I hope to be able to share some of those today, and really what kind of gave me the purpose and passion behind what I get to do and working with teams and organizations and individuals to help them also on their journey. And as iron sharpens iron, I feel like I learn and get the opportunity to compare notes with a lot of different leaders in different industries and hopefully help them with their own experiences and their own intentionality by developing out their teams so they can leave the legacy that they want to leave too.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Brad. It's so amazing how some events are so profound and impact our lives and our life decisions. And I will say, I think really, thank you for your service to the country over here. It takes a lot of selflessness, as it does to be a leader. And that brings me to this question of, you've had these two very significant identities or elements in your life. And that is as a military man with a military training, and also a career as a leader and founder. What are some common traits that you've observed that you believe have contributed to your excellence in both these roles?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's it's something that, because we're always changing, and I'm a big believer in taking that time to reflect and kind of see what has been your path and what have you been most proud of, and what are things you still want to make sure that you're intentional on accomplishing. Um, for me, really just from early on, having folks that probably believed in me before I believed in myself. And so helping me with my confidence, which I think is really important for us as leaders. The military does a phenomenal job of that because they send you through all kinds of trainings, and from the U.S. Army Ranger School to going the
Yeah.
special operations route, there's no better moment of finding out who you are than when you're just probably at your most vulnerable point with being
Mm.
tired and hungry and weak and wet, cold, whatever it is, and seeing what kind of character you truly have. Are you willing to step up and really look how you can be a benefit, how you can be a force multiplier for that organization? And so a lot of that confidence came out of that, because it's about being able to put one foot in front of the other. And General Sam Wilson, who was that 3-star
Yeah.
general I told you about, he was big on just teaching us about courage, and about how oftentimes the moments that we feel that we've hit a level of mastery, that's the time that we need to push ourselves further outside of our comfort zone, because that uncomfortability is when we're
Yeah.
learning and we're growing and when we're developing the most. And for all of us that have experienced that, you really you understand what that means. And I hope to impart that upon my children. I've got 3 young boys, and you can see as they start to gain confidence in what they're doing, you want to encourage them, but then you also want to push them in other areas so they can continue to excel and challenge themselves. And so I think that the confidence, the courage, were big in the military. They've certainly been big in starting your own business. And then
Yeah.
just having that coalition too of people around you, almost like your own internal board of advisors. I found people in the military that I gravitated to, that I loved their leadership style. I watched that it wasn't the old school command and control, lead with the
Yeah.
iron fist. It was more the influence, the inspiration, the way that they drew their soldiers in and their teams, and you just saw this extension of one another. And so as I separated from the service and got into the private sector, you start imagining the possibilities and envisioning what that looks like too. And we're all capable of it. We've just got to make those choices in our everyday behaviors so that people know we care and they're going to be willing to care back. And you can still go light the world on fire and be extraordinarily successful as a business, but you can do it by, with, and through taking care of your people. And I think that's one of the most
Yeah.
important things. And sometimes we miss as companies because we get so focused on the margin or the profitability, and we try to squeeze everything we can out of people, and maybe not look at how we're developing them so that eventually they can serve in a higher capacity, and they can also they can blossom, and they can train others and bring them up too. And when you start seeing that in an organization, it is the most rewarding thing, because um, we're all replaceable at the end of the day. And I'll never
Yeah.
forget a when you join a unit. I was joining a unit in Italy, the 173rd Airborne Brigade Combat Team. I didn't know a soul when I moved over there in my early 20s, and there was a first sergeant that was retiring, and so they were hailing the incoming leaders, and they were farewelling the outgoing leaders. And he was an outgoing leader, and he talked about the sacrifice in the military and what it does to the families, kind of like you and I were talking about
Yeah.
before we got going. And just that he had the unfortunate news that he was having headaches, and he came to find out he had a brain tumor, and there was a good chance he wasn't going to survive. And probably by the grace of God, he did after surgery. But he reflected on that point of his life, and what he shared with us that I will never forget is that he was the guy that was staying until 10 o'clock at night, going home, pulling his dinner out of the microwave, eating, never saw his children as much as he wanted to, or his spouse. He was going back
Yeah.
to the office at 4 in the morning, just a grinder. I mean, just somebody with incredible work ethic and drive for the mission. And when the unit deployed, and he didn't get to deploy because he was in the hospital bed, his family was the one that was there with him. And he said, at the end of the day, the green machine, the army, just like organizations, I mean, they're going to continue to churn with or without us. And so you've got to make sure your values and your priorities are in place. And it doesn't mean that you can't go be extraordinarily successful, but recognize how you create that coalition around you. And oftentimes it starts with our family, and then it starts with the people that believe in the same things that we do, that are interested in high
Yeah.
performance, and that want to be a part of that team because it gravitates and just excites them to the level it does you, and with the conviction that you have. And so I believe in those principles with confidence, with the courage, with building out your coalition. And there's a lot of little things, and I think we'll talk about some of that, but those habits and the discipline required to do those things that maybe sometimes you don't want to do, but you need to do in order to
Yeah,
achieve.
absolutely. And Brad, you had so many profound nuggets over there. I shared with you earlier on that I come from a family of men in the military, right? My father was in the military as well, in the Indian Army. And speaking to what you just mentioned, I saw an abundance. Courage is something you don't, it's not a value it's something you discover when you're almost like called upon to show it. And I think an extension of that, you feel that within the families as well. And that also comes with taking care of your people, which is again something you mentioned is required in abundance even as a leader. The third thing you touched upon, and I know I've seen in abundance back home, is discipline. And I would love to learn a little more from you. What does self-discipline mean to you? And when we talk of discipline and self-discipline, what do you believe is the difference between those two words?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, when I think about discipline and self-discipline, so I'll answer that question first. The way I look at it is there were a lot of things early in my life that required discipline, but it was more of the structure that you found yourself in. So, for
Mm-hmm.
example, if you were going to school, you knew that in order to one day graduate, you had to go to school. So there are these things that are
Yeah.
kind of forced upon you, and it's probably a discipline and a structure that maybe doesn't necessarily equate to self-discipline, because I know early on I was a procrastinator. I was the one that would know a test or a big essay or exam was coming up, and I would put it off until the last minute because I could self-justify my other choices, which weren't always the best choices to make as I was growing up. And same thing being on sports teams, right? I mean,
Yeah.
there's expectations that you're going to show up and you're going to be at the right place at the right time in the right uniform, mentally prepared to do what's required of you, if it's playing football or basketball or baseball or any sport. And so I believe those structures, similar to the military, there's discipline that's required just as the entry to admission. You've got to live up to the rules of the chain of command. You've got to show military customs and courtesies. You have to shave every day as a male. You've got to wear your uniform. You've got to do all those things that you must do in order to conform to that environment that you find yourself in. And so the difference that I see when it comes to self-discipline is more around how what are you doing to make sure, when you, like we described earlier, when your
Yeah.
back's against the wall and you're ready to quit, or you're ready to come up with an excuse for why you could justify to yourself, you could lie to yourself about not doing this, you do it anyway because it's the right thing to do. It's the way. If you want to achieve the outcomes you desire, it doesn't matter how you feel. You got to remove the feeling from it, and you just have to do it. And
Mm.
I had a quote I lived by in Ranger School, and it was all about the discipline required and the sacrifice at that very moment over the ease of the indulgence. Because when you get back, that school is, I wouldn't want to do it again. I'd probably rather go back to combat than go back to Ranger School. But when you're there and you get into that mindset, it's amazing how sharp and just how in tune with yourself you really are. Because the minute you enter back into society and you have all these distractions and these disruptions and these things tugging at you, that's that ease of the indulgence. Because the easy thing
Mm.
to do is self justify, for example, that if everything didn't go perfectly for me in Ranger School, then I was going to miss all these things that I wanted to do on my personal selfish side, be in a friend's wedding, get to go travel, get to go see family. But when you commit to something like that and you honor your commitments, it's out of your control at that point. So all you can do
Mm,
is do what's necessary in order to achieve what you're setting out to go do. And I think that if you look at life that way, you put yourself in the top 1 to 2% of human beings, because if you want to achieve greatness, nothing comes easy. And it's a lot of being able to master the basics and understand that when you don't want to do something, that's when you've got to look and find that intestinal fortitude, that grit, and you've got to go out and do it, and you've got to do it with excellence. You can't do it
mm,
half out. You've got to represent who you are and who you want to continue to become. And so I really credit the military for helping me unlock
absolutely.
that potential, and then making sure that I honor that as things sometimes can get easier, or you can find ways that you could easily cut corners, but not want to do that because it's not who you are and it's not how you want to be remembered. And so there's always going to be that battle though, and you've got to look at those choices, and you got to make those choices that are in alignment
Yeah,
with.
absolutely. Brad, what do you do when you get thrown off the horse? Like, how do you get back? Um, I hear elements of, I think, wanting to show up as your best self. But I mean, in your personal experience, what are one or two things you do to really get back on the horse, when you get knocked off? Um, and like, what can people who are listening to you really take away as how can you really get back and practice that self-discipline when you're in those moments of just not wanting to do it anymore?
Yeah, it's hard, and I think it takes a lot of perspective, and it takes positive self-talk too. And
Yeah,
we're all guilty. We are all guilty, you and I included, of we can let negative self-talk creep in, and
yeah,
in moments of adversity, if we're not aware, we can listen to that, and we can start to see the world that way, and we can start to take on more of a victim mindset or a mindset of
yeah,
scarcity. And you have to have the ability and the pattern interrupt to catch yourself and get back on track. For me, I, I enjoy finding inspiration from leaders that really speak to me, either from our past and in history, or even current
hmm,
ones that you gravitate towards. And so I want to learn about them, because I often think in my head, I wonder how they would handle this situation. I wonder what
mm,
they would
mm,
do. Or and to honor three that I wear on my wrist, I think about guys that we lost, that were remarkable human beings that are no longer here, and what should I do each and every day to honor them and honor their legacy, and not take a day off to feel that way. I mean, yes, absolutely. There have been plenty of times, even in the last year, where I'm sitting there staring in the mirror, thinking, what do I need to do to correct this, or to get back? And we're all going to have those bad days, and I often find that having that dose of humility and self
mm,
reflection and positive self talk, and then also owning the stuff that you got to own. And you know, we can do a better job in society of sometimes showing up and just apologizing too. If I and I often have to do it with my household, right? If I show up and I say something or have a behavior that I shouldn't with my spouse or my children, then I've got to own that, and I've got to set the example as well, and just teach them about being able to apologize and meet people, look at them, connect with them, and hope that we
yeah,
can do better collectively. But that's kind of a just an internal process that I use, is really to use the perspective, use the positive self talk, and then really make sure that you're focused on what's the next thing I can do to start to gain momentum, because those little things have the compound effect, and all those kind of inch towards progress help you get back and start getting that confidence again, and then gaining that momentum, and allow you to get in that state of flow, or what we used to call battle
mm,
rhythm in the military,
yeah,
where you were hopping and popping, and you were having good days, and guys were all, they were full of energy and full of positivity, even when they were doing really difficult work.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. uh, I think what I'm hearing from you is it's okay to slip up. there will be times, let's acknowledge that there will be times you will be down and out. You'll be out of rhythm. You'll be out of that battle rhythm as well. And it's important to have the strength and the humility to both forgive yourself and also seek forgiveness and get back on track. Because I think there's a certain, we all feel a certain amount of, we feel ashamed when I think we slip up on a journey and of self-discipline. So I think it's to allow yourself that space and get back on track and find that motivation. Brad, this brings me to another very important aspect of discipline, which is to do with habits, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like there needs to be a certain cadence of habits and certain specific habits that we develop that allow us and support our journey of self-discipline. How do you develop these new habits and how do you make them stick?
Mm-hmm. There's obviously been a bunch of research and books written on
Yeah,
that, and I'm a fan of James Clear, Atomic Habits. I think that's a
same
great book
here. Yeah.
for a lot of folks. And from my experiences, I mean, I think what you really have to first and foremost recognize is, where do those come from? You have to be able to kind of take inventory and maybe even do a personal audit on what are those habits, or what are the ones that you desire to have, and then really check your beliefs. And when you
Mm,
look at the beliefs, that can often drive the behaviors, which then create the habits, which then chalk them up into our
yeah.
unconscious, of our subconscious, just the things we do habitually, instinctually, without even thinking about it. And it's kind of like that whole discussion around the different wirings of our brain, and how the more things that we can transition to our robot brain, the more we just do them. And
Mm,
so sometimes those things that we're doing robotically, um, and we're not aware of the second and third order effects that it either has on us, on our health, on our success, on our relationships, or any of that, we have to have people that care about us enough to sometimes tell us. And then you've got to say, well, if that's the way that I'm being perceived or showing up, then and it's not who I desire to be, then I need to go back and see where that comes from. And so I always like to
mm,
look at the beliefs of myself or the individual. And if I can start to control that, and it helps you reinforce what habits you desire to get those outcomes. And so I think doing that, and then as you mentioned earlier, and then it's just the self discipline required to stay on the straight and narrow with it, and really be honest about how you're doing, and not look that, okay, well, if I do these things. I mean, I'll give you a silly example. I mean, last night with a group, and I knew it was going to be an early morning today, and I knew that if I even had my alarm clock on my phone anywhere near the hotel bed, I would probably not get out of bed. So I put it in the
mm,
bathroom, because I know myself, and I'll sit there and do the hostage negotiating at 4 in the
yeah.
morning, 4:30 in the morning, and want to have the sirens calling me back to bed. So I think that you gotta really understand what are the beliefs that you have, and what drives those behaviors, and then what habits do you have because of those. And if you want to try to make something stick, then also find that tribe of associations that's going to help you do that too. And
Mm,
that's
mm,
where that like kind framework or mindset comes in. And that's from exercise and working out to going and doing an academic course together to better yourself, or going through behavioral change or mindset
yeah.
types of exercises to help you achieve. But most people, unfortunately, they don't spend enough time thinking on thinking, and they don't think about self-awareness. They don't think about that impact on others, and kind of just go through life. And we could be a human wrecking ball,
Mm,
or we could just have no direction. And so you've got to really take that inventory and spend the time doing it, in order to make those types of things stick. And feedback and those conversations with people
yeah.
that can drive that are always very, very helpful. And that's what I try to hopefully impart upon the teams I get the privilege to work with. And same thing I told you earlier, I want to do that with my children. I used a funny example today about that, and it was with the differences in our children. And my one of my children, my middle, He's a phenomenal athlete, but when he's outside shooting baskets, if he misses one, his unconscious habits is to immediately go to the negative self-talk. I'm terrible.
Mm.
I can't make a shot. And so we came up with an agreement that if you're going to speak like that, then you're going to give me 15 push-ups if I catch it. And so we're either going to get really strong, or we're going to start to catch ourselves when we're having unconscious habits about negative self-talk.
Yeah.
So he's now aware of it to the point where he will stop before he says it, and he'll kind of have that moment, and then he'll focus on what he needs to do for the follow through with his shot versus kind of wallow in the misery of mediocrity, or start kind of having that victim
Yeah.
mindset. And but that's where all that stuff begins, because we allow it in at a young age. And then if he's not careful, he will go on into his teenage years and his early adult years, and he'll start listening to that negative self-talk, and it's going to affect his ability to be successful. And so I take it real seriously. I mean, I think that's big for all of us, and anything we want to get out of life, you gotta really have that vision and start putting your beliefs in action to make it happen.
That's thank you for sharing that. And I must say, your kids are really lucky to have a dad like you. I'm pretty sure you're a fantastic dad. But I would say one thing I'm taking away from everything that you just said is I'm going to put my alarm clock in the bathroom. The next time I have an important, meeting the next day, really get myself out of the bed. Um,
I
this
love
was
the
this
early
was
mornings.
yeah, but this was wonderful, Brad. As we round out this conversation, I have a final question for you, and that is, if you had to give one piece of advice, almost like a mantra, to someone who's just getting started on their journey of self-discipline, what would you say to them?
It's a There's so many things I'd want to say. I'm trying to narrow it down.
Yeah.
I think for anybody getting on that journey, just recognize that we're all on that same path,
Mm.
and that it it takes time, and we live in a society that is all about immediate results, and you're not going to get those, and we're flawed, and we're going to make mistakes along the way, because that's how we are designed as humans, and that's okay. Just don't start to buy into letting that become
Mm.
who you are, and how you interact with the world. So
Yeah.
focus on what you want to do, and just be able to march towards that progress and make those intentional choices, so that even after a month, 2 months, 6 months, a year, you can look back, and you can be proud of what you've accomplished, because it really does work. It's remarkable when you inject that self-discipline, and you say, you know what, I don't see it right now, but a year from now, if it's your financial goals, if it's your health goals, if it's your relationship goals, if you
Yeah.
start committing to that, you will see extraordinary abundance in your life. And yeah, again, it's we have an opportunity, and you don't want to waste it. You don't want to miss it. You want to make sure that you're able to do that. And so I would start there. It's the incremental things that we can do to help us and to help one another, and to really be able to walk down that path.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Brad. This was an extremely insightful conversation. I'm sure for everyone tuning in, but even for me personally, this was extremely insightful. So thank you so much for this conversation. And as we close out our little chat today, we love to do this with everyone. Is we like a little bit of a lightning round, and that is, I have three questions for you, and I love like just first thing that comes to your mind as we ask these questions.
You're
Are you
catching me.
ready, Brad?
That's I mean you're talking to a slow guy from Lower Alabama, so it might take me a second.
That's fine. My first question for you is, what are you reading, watching, or listening to right now?
I am listening to Darren Hardy, who is the founder of Success Magazine. He's somebody that he deeply inspires me,
Hmm.
as a virtual mentor. I love his mindset, and I love a lot of what he publishes. And so he's got a few different courses that I've subscribed to, and it gives me the inspiration to continue, and kind of fill my
Yeah,
cup as well.
amazing. Second question for you. What is something you're deeply grateful for right now?
My family, having the opportunity to send our boys to
Yeah,
camp, and our oldest is a type 1 diabetic, and this was a great experience for him. And, and I mean, when you talk about discipline and we look at when we found that diagnosis out, he, that's tough. And a lot of people go
Yeah.
through struggles like that. And we used the discipline because the discipline required for him to understand what that means to his body when he embraces that to take care of himself, that's going to unlock extraordinary discipline in his
Hmm.
life. Will will allow him to go do whatever he wants because he's learned at a young age what those consequences are.
Yeah.
So just grateful for my family and just the opportunity I have to get to be a father and a husband.
That's beautiful. And I have my last question for you. Think about something you admire about yourself and fill in the blank. If the world were more like me, it would be more.
Oh, I'd say fun. I mean, I enjoy life. I really
I
do.
love that.
I love the relationships and just the joy, the joy that you can find in the moments, and even when the moments are tough. We used to
Yeah.
embrace the suck in the military, and you can find laughs there, and you can find
Yeah.
laughs when things are tough, but just the joy in the moment. So I hope
That's
I hope that answers it.
that does, and that does, we bring it to, we end it on a really light and fun note. So thank you so much, Brad. Thank you for being with us and for this very, very insightful conversation today. Safe travels to you. I know you have you have a long journey ahead of you, and thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I really enjoyed the conversation as well.
As we did. Thank you. With that, we want to thank everyone who joined us today. As a reminder, this is a three-part series, and next week we will have our very own Anthony Ewing, the founder and CEO of Thoughtium, to discuss a little more about the role self-discipline has played in building and scaling of Thoughtium and its culture. You can catch the episode on thoughtium.com/live, and you can access a perspective series on thoughtium.com/perspectives. With that, I'm Ashani Gupta signing off, and I wish you all a wonderful evening. Thank you.